5 books and counting. The Tales from the Omni Vault continues to expand as a universe. Go ahead and check the links down in the description to get your copies today. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I am the Omni Viewer, and while I am predominantly a fan of Godzilla, that doesn't mean I reject King Kong, because how could I? The original 1933 movie is a masterpiece of filmmaking that inspired generation after generation of storytellers. Plenty of people have discussed the multitude of layers to be found within, from the parallels between Carl Denham and Marion C. Cooper to the revolutionary techniques of Willis O'Brien.
Heck, people talk about it so much it makes you wonder if there's anything left to discuss.
Oh, I have no doubt that there is, Snazzy. One thing that stood out to me after a recent viewing was how great this movie is at visual storytelling. I'm not the first to say it, but film is a visual medium, and the golden rule of visual storytelling is show, don't tell. This, of course, is a variation of the old saying that a picture is worth 1,000 words. Basically, if you're using visuals, make the most of them. Tell as much of the story visually as you can, and save the exposition for when it's absolutely necessary. King Kong is practically its own masterclass in how this is done, and I'm honestly surprised that more people don't talk about it in that way.
That is weird, isn't it?
People can talk for hours about the visual innovations King Kong introduced, but they don't always talk about how they're used outside of making Kong himself a fleshed-out character.
But how deep do the layers go, Omni?
Well, Snazzy, that's why we're here. Today we'll be taking a closer look at the visuals of King Kong to see what they tell us about the title character. Most King Kong fans know that the landscape of Skull Island is inspired by the art of Gustave Doré. The most obvious influence is in how the foregrounds are much darker than the midgrounds, which adds depth to the scenes and creates the illusion of the jungle stretching on for eternity. However, there is another effect that these visuals have. Look closely at the works of Gustave Doré, which are easy to find. Whether his work is derived from the Bible, popular literature, or folk tales, they have boatloads of atmosphere. This is achieved by the contrast of light and shadow, the use of scale to make subjects look large or small depending on intent, and the use of the uncanny. The overall effect makes for images that can easily be described as gothic. Gothic. You know, that's a word which accurately describes Kong's cinematic contemporaries. Let's not forget that despite arguably being the prototype for kaiju, King Kong debuted at a time when there was no such thing. Monsters in the movies looked like Dracula, Frankenstein, Jekyll and Hyde, the Mummy, and the Invisible Man. These are horror movies that rely heavily on Gothic atmosphere, but they stick to a very traditional kind of Gothic imagery. Cavernous halls, creepy castles, long candlelit hallways, and moonlit nights. These elements are designed to make the protagonist feel small and helpless in the face of what awaits them. Darkness is where evil thrives, and large empty spaces don't make for good hiding places. The monsters themselves also embody the Gothic tradition of the uncanny. They all appear somewhat human in one way or another, but there's always a detail about them that's off in a way the human mind cannot reconcile. Henry Jekyll can adopt strange physical attributes when he becomes the wild Edward Hyde. Jack Griffin can remove his bandages and vanish before your very eyes. Dracula seems perfectly normal until you lock eyes with him and see the evil he radiates. Even the sympathy we feel for Frankenstein's monster is at odds with his strange proportions and scarred complexion, which make him appear frightening despite his childlike innocence. These Gothic elements are utilized in King Kong, but differences arise thanks to the subject and the setting. Kong himself certainly embodies the uncanny in several ways. First, he's a clearly intelligent primate, which makes him seem oddly human, yet his overall appearance assures us that he's anything but. Seeing such recognizable traits in an animal can be unsettling in its own right. In fact, you might be able to describe Kong as an inversion of Edward Hyde. The 1931 version of Hyde was modeled after a Neanderthal, a primitive brute with no need for decorum, hence why it's so strange to see him act violent and depraved while dressed to the nines like a proper British gentleman. Kong, meanwhile, is a literal animal, too primitive to be classified as human and too big to be fitted for a tuxedo, yet there is humanity within him that one simply would not expect from an ape, especially back in the 30s when so little was known about them. Come to think of it, he displays more decorum than Hyde would ever be capable of. Rather than abuse the object of his desire as Hyde does, Kong protects Andera whenever she's in trouble. In one such instance, he's about to pick her a flower before needing to intervene. That's quite gentlemanly of him.
In this way, Kong's good nature produces a Frankenstein parallel.
Frankenstein's monster looks frightening, he has a limited understanding of how to behave, and he makes mistakes with fatal consequences. But the audience can see a goodness in him that others cannot, which means we're sad to see him persecuted despite it all. Similarly, Anne might not recognize all that Kong does for her because she's terrified out of her wits, but we do, so we feel for him despite his strangeness, especially when he meets his tragic end.
So if Kong is a gothic monster, then Skull Island is his gothic domain.
Remember how I said that gothic settings are meant to make the heroes feel tiny and vulnerable? Well, Skull Island does that in spades. The wall has an obvious scale to it that makes the Venture crew feel puny, but at least their opposition on that side are regular people. On the other side of the wall, in the jungle, everything dwarfs them. The environment itself contains towering columns and high arched canopies. Light plays through the leaves as though shining through stained glass. There's even a steeple in the form of the island's namesake, the Skull Mountain. Oh, and lest we forget, we enter this place through giant doors, another common feature of Gothic buildings.
Kinda makes Skull Island sound like holy ground when you put it that way.
And it is trod upon by a living god, or so the locals call him. Cathedrals were envisioned as the earthly thrones of Jehovah, hence their grandeur and intricate designs. The architects built them this way so as to bring glory to the Almighty. In King Kong, Skull Island is a natural cathedral serving as the very home of a being so mighty that the natives believe him to be a living god on Earth.
Yeah, but they don't just worship him because he's a big old monkey, right?
Well, of course not. There's actually a solid reason Kong is considered master of this domain, and this too is told entirely through visuals. What does it take for one to be considered king? Well, sometimes it comes down to an abstract concept like divine right, royal heritage, embodying positive traits, or just a simple proclamation that one is king. Other times, a king can demonstrate in practical terms why he deserves the title. He leads his armies into battle against his foes and always wins. Or he makes wise decisions that have positive outcomes which affect the kingdom for generations to come. Kong is considered the king of Skull Island, the ultimate life form who rules over all others. But it's no simple proclamation. He can actually demonstrate it. And the movie shows us why he deserves this title through showing us how he interacts with these other creatures. Once we pass through those massive doors in the wall, we witness Kong wage battle against 3 prehistoric enemies. First, he encounters the T-Rex.
I think its official name is the Meat Eater.
Yeah, I know, but come on, it's obviously meant to be a T-Rex. After all, the T-Rex is considered the most fearsome and dangerous dinosaur of all time. Despite countless attempts to undo this image over the years, the T-Rex is still considered the apex predator of the prehistoric world, and pop culture embraces that idea. You go up against a T-Rex and you're as good as dinner. With that in mind, it stands to reason that anyone who could beat a T-Rex would be the new apex life form. And Kong does exactly that. In an intense struggle, the gorilla has a knockdown, drag-out wrestling match with this mighty predator, the first true test of his physical prowess. Despite some close calls, and although the two seem evenly matched, Kong ultimately reigns supreme, delivering a killing blow worthy of a 90s video game.
I still say that fight was rigged. It's reptile discrimination, I tell ya.
I know, Snazzy, but we must recognize that these biases were considered acceptable at the time, even though we know better now. Besides, we have Gamera to make up for it.
Yeah, he did wonders for reptilian representation.
He most certainly... Wait a minute, this isn't a Gamera video, this is about King Kong. We're getting sidetracked. Okay, back on topic. Later, in the cave, Kong has a run-in with this aquatic serpent. Now, some people call it a snake, but that can't be the case because a snake has no limbs.
To be clear, there are some snakes that have little spurs where limbs would be to help them climb trees.
Well, okay, they don't have articulated limbs, but this thing does. Specifically, it has flippers, as opposed to hands and feet. Combining this with the obvious presence of water, this is clearly meant to be an aquatic creature, perhaps something akin to an Elasmosaurus. Despite catching the Eighth Wonder off guard, Kong still wins this fight, and even disposes of the creature faster than he did the T-Rex. Finally, once we're atop the mountain, Kong has a tussle with a pteranodon who shows up. Despite having the advantage of flight, the pteranodon still loses to the monkey. Kong doesn't even give him a chance to retreat. That bird is dead just like all of his other opponents.
Now, did you see the theme connecting them? Kong takes on 3 different opponents, a terrestrial one, an aquatic one, and an avian one.
Each of these creatures are the kings of their respective domains, the land, the sea, and the air. And Kong has bested them all before our very eyes. That means, allegorically speaking, he faced the elements and won. This shows us that he is truly the king of Skull Island, master of all the elements in that domain, and we see this entirely through the visuals.
There is not a single line in the movie that spells it out for us. We just see it for ourselves as plain as day. But Kong's story undergoes a massive inversion when he is taken from his island and brought to ours.
Kong's time in New York City feels like it was designed to be the exact opposite of his time on Skull Island. There are some obvious inversions, like how Kong is chained up in similar manner to Anne, but once he escapes, he also takes on the wonders of the modern society. Guns, cars, trains, all are destroyed in his rampage. But then he climbs the Empire State Building. It's only natural. He lives on the highest point of Skull Island, so going to the highest point in the Big Apple should mean safety. He just wasn't counting on the biplanes showing up. Here we see with certainty that Kong's mastery of the elements has its limits. Man has greater mastery of the air than Kong can ever hope for thanks to technology, which proves to be the 8th wonder of the world's undoing.
Again, though, I must emphasize that all of this is conveyed 100% visually.
None of the actors make commentaries that spell this stuff out for the audience. Instead, Cooper knew that people were smart enough to figure it out for themselves if they really paid attention.
And stuff like that is why King Kong is still considered a classic to this day. Indeed, this is a movie with many layers, and I'm sure people will keep sifting through them for generations to come. I just wanted to help you start digging through this one. Until such time as we meet again, this is the Omni Viewer signing off. I still say the fights were rigged, and that goes double for his first bout with Godzilla. Maybe so, Snazzy, but at least the recent movies make up for it. Yeah, you have to give the Monsterverse credit for that much.
Thank you all for watching. Now be sure to head down to the description to check us out on other platforms, as well as find links to the 5 current books in the Tales from the Omni Vault universe. Again, thank you all, and we'll see you next time.